Hello and welcome to part 8 of this Kerbal Space Program 2 for Science video series. So in part 7 we returned back to Kerbin from the Moon Monument, and now that's pretty much everything done that we need to do on the Moon for the time being. But we do, first of all, we need to actually submit the science or the reports for that. So we'll go to the tracking station and we'll submit all of these reports, and then we'll see what the next mission is going to be. And as I say, you can read all of this in your own time should you want to, but I'm just going to skip straight through them. Yeah, so now that's done, we can see we have 2 new missions. Wheeling and Dealing, which is our secondary mission, is probably one of the easiest missions you can get at the moment, which literally all you need to do is add 4 wheels to any rocket. You could even create the most basic rover and then just launch it onto the launch pad and you will automatically get that mission. But the one we're going to focus on to begin with is Bad Signal, and we are going to be doing multiple missions in this video, but this is the first one we're going to do, which requires us to orbit Minmus with an antenna and possibly a probe core, although we are going to be using a rocket we've already used in the past for this. But yeah, we'll track that anyway, and now we will go to the launch pad because I've already got the rocket lined up for the launch. So yeah, for this video we're going to be using this rocket, which is by Tier 1 Moon Lander. It's a very easy rocket to build and it only uses Tier 1 parts. If you want to know how to build this, I do have a video build guide for this, so please feel free to check that out. The only difference I've made is I've added some struts, although they're not strictly necessary, but the one thing that we do need for this mission is we definitely need an antenna, so I've added a small antenna just on the bottom of the penultimate stage there. So yeah, the other rocket that we've built, the Medium Moon rocket, that one will also do these missions with ease as well, but like I say, we're just going to use this one because it's a little bit lighter and it's actually a little bit easier to get down to Minmus's surface. So anyway, before we even launch, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go onto the map. Then if we find Minmus, which is there, and set that as our target, we can see now if we look down or look across Kerbin on an equatorial plane, we can see that Minmus is actually at an inclination to Kerbin, and it's at 6 degrees, although that isn't really that consequential. But what I would ordinarily do is I would, when going to Minmus or when launching to anything around Kerbin in an inclination, I'd ordinarily aim to launch my rocket into as close to the same inclination as possible. So to do that, what I would normally do is I would line up Minmus's orbit line behind Kerbin, and then what we're going to do is we're going to warp forwards until the Kerbal Space Center is right in the center of Kerbin. There we go, and that just means that now once we launch, then we should be able to get into roughly the same inclination. And we could launch equatorial like normal if we wanted to, and then just change our inclination in space, but this is just the way I prefer to do it. Now, one thing to note is that where we are launching at the minute on this side of the planet, Minmus would actually be going upwards on its orbit, so it would actually be on its ascending node, whereas if we were doing it from the other side, so we were launching from this side of the planet, then Minmus would actually be going down. So the reason that's important is on this side of the planet, what we're going to do is we're going to launch just to the north of the east line on the nav ball, around about 85 or 84 degrees. And then conversely, if we were launching from the other side of the planet, we would launch just south of the east line. But like I say, we're going to launch just north of this. So now we are set and in position. We're going to get straight into the launch. So just as at the beginning of part 6, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to skip through this launch to try and save a little bit of time, because as I mentioned, we are going to be doing multiple missions in this video. And we have also done a few launches already, and my launches always follow the same launch profile. As I say, we would launch to 2,500 meters pointed straight up, and then steadily pitch over, keeping the level indicator pointed at the bottom of the green prograde marker on the nav ball until we reach 45 degrees, where we'll hold until we reach around about 85,000 meters apophysis. But yeah, if you want to know how I always get into orbit, as I say, I've already done it in a few of my earlier videos, and the how to get into orbit video basically goes through it in detail, so feel free to check that out if you want to know how I usually get into orbit. But otherwise, once we are up in space, we'll get straight into the next part of the video. Right, so now we're in orbit. You can see that our relative inclination at the moment in relation to Minmus's orbit is at 0.7 degrees, and if we were to have launched at an equatorial orbit, it would have been around about 6 degrees, because that is the inclination of Minmus. So what we're going to do is we're just going to get that down to 0.0 degrees, and the easiest way I find to do that is, instead of faffing around with a manoeuvre node, because we're approaching the ascending node, we can point anti-normal on the nav ball. And then once there, what we'll do is we'll just warp to a point just ahead of the ascending node and perform a small burn just to match our inclinations with Minmus's. And of course, if you were approaching the descending node, you'd want to point at normal on the nav ball, but now we are at the ascending node, we'll flatten, or we'll match our inclination with Minmus's. And now what we're going to do is we're going to treat this Trans-Minmus Injection burn exactly as we would if we were going to the moon. So we're going to find Minmus, which is there, and then we're going to extend our orbit so that our apoapsis just touches Minmus's orbit line just ahead of where it currently is. And once the closest approach markers, or the distance to target markers, have shown up, we'll just move it around the orbit until we get an encounter. And there we go. So we can go quite low on this. I'm actually going to aim for around about 50 kilometers, I think, above the surface. We could go even lower than that, because there is so little gravity around Minmus that, and it doesn't have a atmosphere, obviously, that it doesn't really matter exactly how far above we get to, but we'll go for, as I say, around about 50ish just for this one. 53, 54 will do, actually. So yeah, now that's set, we just need to point at the manoeuvre and perform this burn. Once that's done, we are going to do a mid-course correction. We don't have to do a mid-course correction, but I'll explain exactly why we're doing the mid-course correction once we get to the mid-course correction. But yeah, now that's set, we can just point at the manoeuvre and perform this burn. And you can actually warp during burns, although it's not 100% advisable. If it's a particularly long warp, probably go no higher than 4 or 10 times warp speed, and then stop the warp once you start to get down to around about 10 seconds, because it's very easy to overdo it and end up going too far and then having to use more fuel to get back into Minmus's or any other planet's sphere of influence. But as I say, because we're getting close, we're now going to reduce the throttle just as we did when going to the moon. We're going to wait until we get our encounter. We may have gone a tad too far there, but I don't think it's going to matter that much. But let's see what we're looking at. So we're at 107 at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'll use RCS and I'll just lower it down a little bit. And 46 will do, I think. So for this particular mission, all we need to do now is go into Minmus's atmosphere, or Minmus's sphere of influence even, and circularize our burn, or even just get into orbit around Minmus, and that will complete the mission. But because, well, I know what the next mission is going to be, what I'm actually going to do is do a mid-course correction. So I'm going to create the maneuver somewhere in the middle of the orbit, or of our trajectory even. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to aim to enter Minmus on an polar orbit, which involves just going straight, well, 90 degrees straight up over the poles. So we'll use our purple arrows to move it down, and of course we'll move the green arrows as well, just to reduce our periapsis and make sure that we're not going too far away. And it's the same case with any mid-course correction where you wanted to change your inclination. But yeah, so that is looking like it would do us pretty well for a polar orbit. So once again, we will perform this manoeuvre and then we'll transfer straight into Minmus's sphere of influence and circularise our orbit. So now the manoeuvre is set. Before we even actually warp to the manoeuvre, we're actually going to do some science, because we are currently, if we have a look at our experiments button, we're in high orbit above Minmus. So we do have the option to get a bit of science for this. So that'll give us a nice 100 and however many science for that. And now all we need to do is warp to the manoeuvre. And the second we enter orbit around Minmus, we will actually automatically get the first mission. There you can see we've just entered Minmus's orbit, so that's given us the first mission to start off with. And we don't strictly need to actually circularise our orbit, but I do like to have my orbits relatively circular. But yeah, so now we're in orbit around Minmus. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to go back to the mission control building, and then we will submit the report for this one. And as I say, if you want to read the information or the dialogue afterwards, then feel free, but I'm just going to skip straight through. And now that's done, we have 3 new missions. So the Lil Chonka mission requires us to launch or to land 200 tons on Minmus, which is a bit of an ask, so that one's probably not going to get done for some time. The Kerbal Orbit Mission, or Keostationary Orbit even, we will be doing that once we have completed the Minimus Monument mission. But as you can see, that just requires us to land at the source of the mysterious signal on Minmus. So I'll tell you what, we will track these 2 missions now. And then if we go back to the tracking station and control the ship, we can now see that the mysterious signal is up here in this little crater. And the reason we went to a polar orbit is because Minmus does actually rotate. So what's going to happen if we warp forwards is, while at a polar orbit, this signal will actually be passing underneath our orbit, well, twice every rotation of Minmus. So yeah, what we'll do is we are now going to get ready to get for this signal. So we'll start off by creating a manoeuvre on the opposite, well, on the south side of our orbit, and we're going to lower our periapsis to around about, say, 10,000 meters above the surface. It's going to be a very similar landing to the one that we did to get to the moon monument. And we're going to 10,000 meters because that'll leave us plenty of clearance above any of the ridges or mountains. So yeah, now that's set, we can point at the manoeuvre and perform this burn. And it's only going to be a very small burn, so we might even be able to use RCS for this. But we'll warp forwards and we will see how it goes. So RCS will take a little bit of a while, so we'll just use partial throttle to get ourselves down, and we can judge our height or periapsis on the orbital info panel when in the flight view. But yeah, so that is us set now. Now if we delete the manoeuvre, we can see that the manoeuvre, or that the signal is going to be passing under our orbit around about here. So the first thing we'll do, we could just fly there and then do a landing burn, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a manoeuvre, and for this one we're going to completely nullify our horizontal speed, so we'll be going straight down on top of it. So now that's set, we can warp to the manoeuvre. And you can see now that the warp has slowed down. That means that we're actually in low lunar or Minmus orbit. So we have another chance to do a bit more science. So we'll hit the experiment button and get in more science. And this is the point where the speed will actually slow right down the warp. So it can take a little bit of a while to do it like this. But as I say with this game, patience is a virtue. It's always best just to take your time and not try and rush. But yeah, once we have reached the manoeuvre node, we'll then be able to perform this burn and do our landing. And because there's so little gravity on Minmus, it's actually way more easy to land on than, say, the moon or any other planet for that matter. So now we're getting close. What I'm going to do is I'm going to orient the ship, and then once the timer has hit 0, we can go to full throttle. And say this should basically stop us right over the top of the target, and then we'll be able to come straight down on top of it. And now we can actually delete the manoeuvre node, and as I say, we don't want our orbits, well, it started to speed up again there, which means that we were starting to go in the opposite direction. So as you can see, we're coming in a little bit to the side, so what I'll do is I will turn the ship and point it in the direction of the, well, the monument. And then we're just going to do a small burn, just to try and change our trajectory a little bit, so that we're heading more towards the target. Now we're here, we can point retrograde on the nav ball, although we do need to make sure that the velocity is set to surface so that we actually get an accurate landing. We can also extend the landing legs as well and turn on any lights if we need them. So you can see we're probably going to be landing more to the side of the monument, so we'll reduce our horizontal speed a little bit more, try and get it so that we're coming straight down on top of it. And that's looking pretty good now. We should be landing pretty much straight on the target, so we'll just descend nice and steadily, and as I say, because the gravity is so low, we're not going to drop that quickly, and it's very easy to slow ourselves back down again when we get close to the surface. So now we're starting to get close to the ground, we'll increase the throttle a little bit and just reduce our speed to somewhere below 10 meters per second. And like I say, as long as you are below 5 meters per second upon landing, you shouldn't break anything on the rocket. Anyway, we'll find our shadow and we'll use that as a reference for how we're doing with regards to our descent. I'm also going to increase the throttle a little bit just to get us below 5 meters per second. Now we're just about to land, we will be prepared to cut the throttle as soon as we touch down. And there we are, nice soft landing at the Minmus monument. So yeah, that's That's the Minmus Monument. It's quite an interesting one, this one, isn't it? Yeah, so you can have a look around if you like, but obviously because we are here, the first thing we want to do is we want to gather some science. So we'll hit the experiments button, and as usual we will need to EVA as well and get a surface sample. So we'll EVA the Kerbal. We can just let go and it'll slowly float down to the surface. And then once there, right click on him and hit Run Surface Survey. There we go, and of course the only other thing we want to do is plant a flag. So now that's done, it's time to reboard the rocket. So let's see where the door is. I believe it's over this side, and you could jump, however, because the gravity is so light, you'll actually jump way higher than the rocket. So what we're going to do is activate our jetpack and then just use shift to boost upwards ever so slightly and slowly until we're able to grab the rocket, because if you've seen the build video, you'll know this rocket doesn't actually have any ladders on it. But if you do have ladders, then obviously you can just climb the ladders. Now that's set, we will board, and we could just take off now. However, we can get a little bit more science while we're here, because if we go just outside of the monument, we'll be able to get some science from the craters as well. So what we'll do is we will increase the throttle ever so slightly, and then if we point towards, well, just away from the monument, we'll start to travel in that direction. And now what we'll do is we will cut the throttle, and once we start to descend again, we'll point at retrograde and just do another slow descent to the surface. So apparently we are still at the monument, so we're just going to do another quick hop to get a little bit further away, and then ideally we will be able to get some more science, as I say. There we are, now we are classed as being in the craters. So as I say, we can get a little bit more science by doing another experiment. We'll EVA again and grab another surface sample. You don't necessarily have to do this, but it's always good to get as much science as we can for future missions. Right, and now it's just a matter of getting back into orbit. So let's see where we are to start off with on the planet. So if we were to take off straight east at the moment, we'd probably be in quite a hefty inclination in relation to Minmus's orbit, because what we want to be doing is, just as with any manoeuvre where we're trying to get back in towards either Kerbin, or if, for example, we were coming from one of the outer planets back in, we want to be burning retrograde to Minmus's direction of travel. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to warp forwards until our ship is roughly in line with Minmus's orbit line. So I'll walk forwards, and I'm going to do it on this side of the planet just so that we're actually taking off in the light. And now we are here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to launch into a polar orbit again. So we'll start off by increasing the throttle a little bit. And we can obviously raise the landing gear now. And we obviously need to make sure that we're not going to end up hitting any of the craters. So we'll orient our nav ball and then we will pitch towards the red north line to about 45 degrees. And now we're going to aim to get our apoapsis. Well, we don't have to go that high, we could just go back up to 10,000 meters, but because we want to have a bit more of a warp capability, then we're going to go up to around about 50. Now that's set, we'll go onto the map and create our orbit maneuver. And we are going for a polar orbit just because it's a little bit easier to get back to either Kerbin or get in for the Keostationary Orbit if our inclination is close to or our orbit is close to matching with Minmus's direction of travel. Whereas, like I say, if we were in a different, if we were like going around in that direction, it's a little bit more difficult to get back. It's not hugely difficult. Especially since we're only at Minmus, but when we go to the outer planets, this is the technique that I'd usually use. Anyway, yeah, now that's set, all we need to do is point at the maneuver and perform this burn. Now all we need to do is get back in towards Minmus, towards Kerbin. But as I say, if you weren't doing the Keostationary Orbit Mission, then you just need to extend your orbit until you get down below Kerbin's sphere of influence. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to aim to reach 2,863 kilometers. So we'll start off by creating a maneuver plan on the backside of the planet, and then we will extend our orbit until we leave Minmus's sphere of influence, and we'll keep going, moving the maneuver node so we're actually leaving Minmus's sphere of influence somewhere around where the retrograde orbit line is. And as I say, we're just going to go down until we reach around about 2,863. There we are, and now we just need to perform this manoeuvre. And as I say, if you're aiming to get back to Kerbin, then just keep going all the way down to about 25,000 metres above the surface, and then you can just go straight back and do a re-entry. But now we are set, we can walk forwards and perform this burn. Now that's done, let's see how we're doing. So we're actually at 2788, so we'll just use RCS to get ourselves back up to around 2,863. And it doesn't have to be 100% exact, so 264 will probably do the trick, but as you can see we can get to 2863 that way. So now all we need to do is focus on curbing and do a circularization maneuver. Now that's set, all we need to do is point at the maneuver and perform this burn. There you can see we're not even at fully 286 or 2862 by 2863 there, but we've already got that mission. So that's that one done. We can go to a full Keostationary orbit if we want to, but we don't necessarily have to. Generally what Kerbal Stationary Orbit does, or Keostationary Orbit, it's like a geostationary orbit in real life, is if we were to look down on Kerbin now and walk forward, what's going to happen is Kerbin will pretty much stay exactly still. So you can see we're staying over the same point of the planet, and the reason it's rocking up and down is because we're actually at an inclination. But that just means, in real life for example, they use this technique for communications satellites, so you can have a communications dish on the ground and it doesn't have to move around to point at the satellite as it's moving across the sky. It can just always point at exactly the same point of the sky and you'll know it's always going to be pointed at that satellite. But anyway, yeah, now that's done, all we need to do is get back to Kerbin. So we don't even need to create a maneuver for this, we can just point ourselves at retrograde. And then we'll do a retrograde burn until our apoapsis, or periapsis even, reaches below the atmosphere. So as usual, we'll aim for about 25,000 meters above the surface. But yeah, so that's pretty much all there is to this video. I hope you enjoyed it. In the next video, we're actually going to be going to Duna for the first time, because we are going to be going to the Duna monument, which, I'll be honest, has been a bit of a challenge getting the rocket to work and also landing at the monument, because it's quite a difficult place to land. It's high up on the orbit or on the planet, a bit like Minmus's monument was. However, there is atmosphere at Duna. It's also a bit of gravity as well, and the area where the monument is quite bumpy as well, but we'll see what that's like in the next video. Anyway, as I say, that's all there is for this particular video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I would really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe and maybe even leave a comment and let me know what you thought, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.